Thank you very much, Brian and Michelle, and to the Orlando family. It's great to be together again tonight. And it's particularly special to have my Michelle join us tonight. And maybe I would have to say she was first your Michelle before she became my Michelle. When I think about the years that she was back in UCF as a young Christian, I wasn't even yet a disciple at the time she started university there. But then we met in Jamaica. And it was quite interesting because she had come home from Orlando for Christmas vacation. And it happened to coincide with the very day I landed from Trinidad. So guys, the day that Michelle and I met each other happened to be her birthday. Yeah, back in 1999. So God has been good to us, and you know the journey has been a very, very special one. So it's great to have her with us tonight. And so as was it another Brian who prayed? I'm not remembering the brother who prayed. Was it a Michael? Michael would have prayed about us going into pillar number 3, which is the nobility pillar. And we will see as we get into our study of the Proverbs tonight that there is a connection between pillar number 2, the integrity pillar, and pillar number 3, nobility. So let me go ahead and share my screen at this time. And Brian, could I again get the thumbs up from you that it's clear? Yep. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So pillar number 3, as we continue our study of the book of Proverbs. And if I could, especially if you might be joining us for the first time, our study really has had an intentional focus on our character. And if I could present a bit of a flow chart of what we've been looking at so far, we have established that wisdom is the foundation for these pillars. It's God's wisdom. It comes from him. And so it's trustworthy, it's reliable. He is the ultimate source. And the case that I've presented is that humility really needs to be the first pillar because it is what allows us to rely on God, to depend on him, and to really use his word as the gauge, the compass for our decision making, but also for the formation of our character. Last week we looked at the integrity pillar, and this really had to do with completion or wholeness, the inside and the outside person matching. Nobility, somewhat connected to integrity. It really is moral uprightness. And the word upright actually appears quite a number of times in the book of Proverbs. What I've sought to do in this pillar is look at some of the related themes. So this is our character flow chart that I'm calling it up to this particular point. Early in the book, or maybe I should say in chapter 3, I really sought to piece together and summarize the connection between these early pillars. And so I'm quoting from page 45. It says, it takes wisdom, the foundation, to stay on the path. It takes humility, pillar number 1, to keep asking for directions to ensure that you do not get lost. It takes integrity, pillar number 2, to be motivated by your inner value system and driven by your clarity of purpose. These are the building blocks that are placed next to pillar number 3, the nobility pillar. And so these interconnected qualities of the inner person can be represented in this diagram. And these are the first 3 pillars. With pillar number 1, we're building on wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, we've said. So we understand that we humans, we're limited, we're frail, we're finite. Our life's meaning and purpose really comes from our relationship with God. Humility, we also establish that we're continually growing, so we never arrive. We don't ever stop. We keep spiritual ambition. It's similar to the idea that Paul spoke about in Romans 12, where he said, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor. In integrity, we spoke about really zeroing in on the inner value system, not defining success by external measures. and having a clarity of purpose from within. And today we're going to talk about moral uprightness and being motivated intrinsically. Acts of nobility flow from a character of integrity. Integrity refines the inner person and fuels the internal system of self-evaluation that leads to right conduct. That's pillar number 2. The right conduct, the right behavior is what I am defining as nobility. What is it? I'm defining nobility for our purposes as doing the right thing every time. Doing the right thing every time. And that every time is going to take on significance as we consider intrinsic motivation. Why do I do what I do? Why do I do what I do even when no one else is watching? Why am I still motivated to be upright, even though there's no audience to cheer me on? These are some of the things we want to consider with pillar number 3. So the nobility pillar, I'm suggesting, is a natural offshoot from the integrity pillar. In Proverbs chapter 12, verse 4a, a wife of noble character is her husband's crown. We know of the noble character of the excellent wife in Proverbs 31. But even in Proverbs 12, we see this pairing of the wife and the noble character. And the language that the proverb uses is that she is her husband's crown. In other words, noble character has worth. It has spiritual value. And even though the original context of this passage is dealing with the wife's character, I think we can, by extension, look at the fact that if it is the husband who has a noble character, that he too will be valuable to his wife. And so I don't think in any way that the spirit in preserving this text was saying that it is only the wife who should pursue a noble character. That's the spotlight in this verse. And let's say we're not married. Yeah, whether we've not become married yet, maybe we're widows, whatever our station may be, the principle is a noble character has a value. It's described as a crown. And so I want us to be encouraged as we think about pursuing nobility of character, because God sees it as valuable. And that matters, even if the world does not necessarily suggest to us that this is something worth pursuing. But my own experience is that even as I look at various fields, some more than others, people are appreciating more and more character issues. And, it started with God. And very often we humans were the ones who were late to the dance. Yeah. But God is the one who came up with this idea of valuing character. Allow me to make a couple other points here. Habits of nobility produce excellence in character. And I talk here about habits of nobility because there is worth in making consistently good choices. So I'm presenting here an idea, a principle that to develop long-lasting and unbreakable habits of nobility, we must make consistently good choices. And those choices themselves are based on sound judgment. Proverbs 13 verse 15 talks about this idea of good judgment. It says, good judgment wins favor, but the way of the unfaithful leads to their destruction. So good judgment wins favor. And this is not the only passage in the Proverbs that highlights the benefit of good judgment. I think we become persons with skillful, wise judgment when we daily practice prudent decision-making. And I want to emphasize something here. This decision-making applies even in the so-called small areas. It's the power of habit, and great books have been written about habits. We have experts dealing with, habits. some in a spiritual context, and some in the context in maybe our personal and professional lives. But if in what we might call the so-called small areas we're constantly doing the right thing, then without even necessarily thinking about it, we find our character being shaped. And then we start finding that doing the right thing starts to become second nature. You don't even think about it because it's almost part of your DNA now, yeah? And so, well, we have more than one Michelle on tonight. So Michelle Santos, if I could please ask for your intervention here. And brothers and sisters, this is my first question for you to place your answers in the chat. I've just been talking about the idea of these small areas. So here's my first question. What are some of those seemingly small areas where it's important to do the right thing when no one is watching? So Michelle, if I can go over to you, please, to get some of the responses. Thanks.
Got it.
Thank you.
Reaching out, driving, at home with family, picking up some trash, not wasting time, your taxes, flossing your teeth, what you watch on TV, responding to my children at work. That's what we got.
That's great. I mean, we even got some oral hygiene in there as well, too, which is a little bit convicting. I was a little bit slow on the draw when I started to realize that, yes, it's important to take care of my teeth as well, too. So I appreciate that. And we got a nice array of responses there. We heard things like taxes, financial integrity, what we like at home, responding to our children, what we watch in terms of entertainment, what we watch on television. Yeah. Someone said reaching out as well too, which is really appreciate that, because, you know, there's an opportunity to do the right thing. And guys, our human nature, because of our natural tendency to want approval or to let people know the good that we're doing, sometimes our motivation can end up getting a bit mixed. And it's only when others are watching we do what is right. I'm putting to us that nobility really stems from and has the ability, a person of noble character has the ability to do the right thing when no one else is watching. Michelle, let me just do a quick trivia here, and I think the answers may come quickly. I'm thinking of a passage where Jesus said, and chapter and verse would be fine. I'm thinking of a passage where Jesus advocated for us to do things in secret where only God would see. Can anybody put in the chat book and chapter?
Matthew 6.
Michelle, you mean the very first person got it right?
Yep, that's the kind of people we got.
Hello, hello. Who gets the credit for this? Is it Brian? Is it you? Is it
I wasn't playing. It's Doreen, Jeff, and the little family.
Excellent. Right off the bat, Matthew 6, the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah. So, Michelle, while they're on the ball, what are the three things Jesus in particular highlighted in Matthew 6? He says, these three things, do them all where no one can see. God will reward you. What are those three things?
Praying, giving. That's two. We need a third one.
Yes.
Praying, giving, loving, fasting.
Fasting. There we go. So prayer, fasting, and what some would call almsgiving. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Jesus said these are things to be done when no one else can see but God. And God, who sees what you do in secret, will reward you. So I want to suggest that philosophy from the Sermon on the Mount is what I'm presenting as our definition of nobility. And so, thanks, Michelle, and thanks for the answers that came in. Very, very impressive, Brian. These guys are on the money. when it comes to knowing the Bible. Good stuff. Yeah. Here are some of the examples I thought of as well. And I think it coincides with some of the answers that we heard. Noble practices that no one sees. Times of contemplation, silence, and solitude with God. Yeah. So that's kind of getting into some spiritual disciplines. Nobody else is around to see this. You have carved your own special time with God. Times of contemplation, times of stillness. Yeah. Resisting temptation. Nobody else might be around, but you say to yourself, I'm not going to give in to this temptation because I want to honor God. Honesty with tax returns. I think somebody mentioned that. Honesty as a consumer. Have you ever gotten back too much change? Well, I mean, everything is done by cards right now, but in the days when we use cash, maybe you got back extra change and you realize that. We could stop and think, oh, wow, Christmas came early. God bless me. Or we could say, hey, you know what? I actually got back too much. You may have miscalculated. Here's this $25 extra. Yeah. What about acts of kindness to the homeless, to beggars, to orphans and widows, to disciples who are shut in? And of course, the COVID protocols make things a little bit more difficult where that is concerned, And Brian and I were talking, and he mentioned he's having a meeting, a conversation with Hope. Hope does absolutely fantastic work globally. But here's the challenge. Do we do things when Hope hasn't initiated a program? Yeah? Or do we do things when the leadership hasn't initiated a program? What about this on our own? Maybe as a family, just cooking a meal and going somewhere where there might be orphans, or there might be widows, or maybe the number of homeless people on the streets, it might not be as prevalent as in the Caribbean, but these are opportunities to do acts of nobility. And guess what? There's no selfie, there's no posting on any kind of social media. This is just, you've done it, God has seen it, goodbye. And that's it. That's your secret between you and God. When we develop these types of habits, it really purifies us from the inside. And I think it's really noble. I want to present some, if I could call it, family members of nobility. And I want to look at nobility's relationship with loyalty. Proverbs 3 in verses 3 and 4, it says, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. And that's interesting because there are some things when you live them out, there's spiritual favor and there's social favor. Both men and God look at it and it's favorable. And here the proverb talks about love and faithfulness. And in chapter 3 of the book, I've made a connection between faithfulness and loyalty. Yeah, and these twin virtues, I think, are connected to nobility. So love, everything begins and ends with love. There's just so much evidence of that in life and in scripture. And faithfulness, the ability to show loyalty and fidelity. So I'm connecting these virtues to nobility, and we can even consider them to be badges of honor. Nobility, loyalty, faithfulness. I think they're one family. Yeah, I think they're one family. And so as we seek to develop these qualities, let's be confident in the way that God will be working on our characters, even when we not necessarily see it happening. Allow me to go to 3 chapters in the book of Proverbs, which really had an emphasis on sexual integrity. And yet in the midst of that, we see some great principles that I think can help us as we discuss this nobility pillar. I want to look at Proverbs 5, verse 21. The NIV, it says, for your ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all your paths. In the English Standard Version, it says, for a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. I want to suggest that one of the, and maybe potentially the most powerful motivation for acts of nobility, doing the right thing every time, is being conscious of the presence of God. And those of us who may have an interest in the Christian classics may have heard about a book called Practicing the Presence of God, someone by the name of Brother Lawrence, all right, who I believe was a chef. And he was so passionate about the presence of God. I mean, you read the book and it describes someone in a kitchen, and I mean, he is preparing food like he's preparing it for God himself. He's so conscious of being before God that he does everything wholeheartedly, everything. So he's slicing up carrots or cutting up meat, whatever it is in the kitchen, and he is doing it with energy and zeal. Why? The presence of God. So Proverbs 5:21 says, a man's ways are before God's eyes. God ponders, he examines our paths. So we're before God's view. And I think that's a great motivation for us. Proverbs 15 verse 3, in similar language says, the eyes of the Lord are everywhere. God in his omnipresence. Yeah, he is seeing me in Trinidad. He is seeing my wife, Michelle, in a different room. He is seeing the children, and somebody was knocking on the door just now, but they didn't get in. He's seeing all of you guys in Orlando. Yeah, he's seeing other services happening around the world. His eyes are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. And so if God's presence is so real, can we perhaps be motivated by a consciousness of his presence? And that very fact is enough to say, I am going to do what is right. You know why? God's eyes are on me, and I want to please him. So what the eyes can see can be amazing, yeah? And I've shared before, I wouldn't want that particular bird to watch me with those eyes in the dark. It would wake me up. Michelle Santos, back over to you. I have a question again for the brothers and sisters. And I want one-word answers as best as possible. Here's the exercise. I want you to use an adjective that for you best describes God's eyes. For example, when you think about God's eyes on you, is it forgiving eyes? Is it judging eyes? How would you describe God's eyes? Michelle, over to you, please.
Okay, I have compassionate, showers of love, encouraging, blessing, compassionate again, protecting, patient, piercing, caring, Father, patient again, loyal, caring, daughter, grace, loving, mercy. Yep, I think that's what we got.
Okay, great. And Michelle, if we could probably collectively try and remember, compassionate came up a couple of times, yeah? Mm-hmm. I think we heard caring a couple of times. Definitely heard merciful, definitely heard loving. Yeah, patient came up a couple of times as well too. And so I love doing this particular exercise because, you know, Brian and Michelle, what it does, it helps us to see the congregation's view of God. And it's wonderful because the adjectives that have come out are very positive. Now, one person mentioned piercing eyes, and that's also true, and that's not necessarily a negative thing. But guys, do you realize our view of God directly impacts how we present God to others, eh? Whether it's in evangelism, whether it's to our children or people that we influence, yeah? And for those of us who teach, those of us who speak, whether in small groups or otherwise, our view of God impacts on how we teach about him. So I love the fact that the dominating sentiment was a God who is loving, faithful, compassionate, merciful, yeah, caring. And that's wonderful because if we view God that way, we will present God that way. And that's attractive. That's very attractive for seekers. People who may say, tell me about the Christian God. Why is it you worship the God that you do? Why have you given up so much for this God that you worship? And you're able to say, my God, as the song said, my God is awesome. Yeah, provider, so many other things. So brothers and sisters, thanks for that. Michelle, thanks again. So moving to chapter 6, nobility lessons from Proverbs 6, verse 20 to 25. My son, keep your father's commandment and forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always. Tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. When you are awake, they will talk with you. Guys, notice, when you walk, when you lie down, when you're awake. In other words, all the time. Yeah? The wisdom of the Proverbs is saying, hey, embrace this spiritual wisdom. Bind it on your neck. And what will happen? It's going to take care of you. It's going to guide you. When you walk, when you lie down, wisdom will protect you and watch over you. When you're awake, they will talk with you. There's a companionship almost here with biblical wisdom. But where does it start? Binding it on your heart, keeping it within. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life. Michelle, quick trivia here. This proverb in verse 23 matches with one of the Psalms that describes God's word as a lamp and a light. Which Psalm is it? Let's see if we get a correct answer right away.
119.
Oh, righty, there we go again. And that was smart. Just choose the longest chapter in the Bible. You can't go wrong with that. That was smart. That person should get bonus points. All right, a light and a lamp. So Psalm 119 presents God's word as a light and a lamp. Proverbs 6 says the commandment is a lamp, the teaching is a light, to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Is presenting, some ammunition for sexual integrity. And interestingly, verse 25 says, do not desire her beauty in your heart. So now it's dealing with the desires of the heart. It's really going deep down, because that's where a temptation begins. It's our desires within. Jesus himself said, look, man, that's what makes you unclean. He says in the Gospels, Matthew 15, Mark 7, what comes from within. So the Proverbs here says, don't desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. When you go into chapter 7, my son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. So there's an emphasis in these early verses in chapter 7 on keeping. When you keep, you guard. Yeah? Bind them on your fingers, write them away on the tablet of your heart. And I often smile at verses like this because there were tablets before Kindle and Samsung. Yeah? Different type of tablet. All right? The tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, and I love this, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend. Think about the brothers and sisters that you are really, really close to. Yeah? And the Proverbs is presenting a case that wisdom can be called, and insight can be called an intimate friend. Do you see wisdom that way? Do you see these qualities that God is presenting to us from the Proverbs as worthy enough to be intimately close to us? And wisdom is often personified in the Proverbs. So we can have wisdom, we can have God's inspired word as an intimate friend, someone who speaks to us, someone who guides us, someone who tells us what to do, what decisions to make, how to make the right choices when no one else is around. So let me start summarizing pillar number 3 before we get a chance to go to our breakout groups. The nobility pillar seeks to guide us in making righteous daily choices at every turn. Where does the motivation come from? It comes from within. It's intrinsic. It's not extrinsic. And our primary driving force is the presence of God. No matter if no human being is around, my consciousness of God motivates me to always do what is right. What this does, it lays the foundation for habits of nobility, which ultimately will produce noble character, which Proverbs 12 described as a crown. So here are our discussion questions, which may have already been circulated to you. Question number 1, what habit of nobility, and I'm saying what secret act of righteousness would you like to grow in the most? Is it giving to the poor? Is it meeting maybe the material needs of a brother or sister? Is it the exercise of new spiritual disciplines, or is it something else? But what can you grow in? What are the things that you could grow in, especially when nobody else is around? Yeah. And number 2, is there a memory scripture that you have used in the past that helped you to make the right choice when only God was watching? You know, you had a temptation or something was there before you had a decision to make, and you remember the passage and it helped you. There's nobody else around. It's just you and the situation, and you remember the verse and it helped you. You know, if you have a passage like that, one of those power verses that helped you in the past, please share it with your group. I think it could be really encouraging to be able to hear from one another, all right, how these passages helped in the past. So Brian, let me stop sharing at this point in time. Let me hand back over to you so that the breakout groups can begin.